The auction block reeked of fear and desperation. Jake Morrison pressed his face against the cold metal bars of the holding cage, watching another group of humans get dragged toward the platform. Their eyes were hollow, beaten down by months or years of captivity. He recognized that look, had worn it himself for the past 3 years. The Vorthack auctioneer's 6 arms gestured wildly as it described the merchandise to the crowd of alien buyers. Jake's stomach turned as the translator in his ear converted the creature's clicks and hisses into words he wished he couldn't understand. Fresh stock from the Sol System breeding farms. Prime cuts, well-marbled, perfect for the upcoming Harvest Festival. Jake clenched his fists. 3 years ago, he'd been Captain Morrison of the Earth Defense Force, leading humanity's final desperate stand against the alien invasion. 3 years ago, he'd watched Earth burn from the bridge of his dying ship. Now he was just another piece of meat waiting for slaughter. Pissed. "Hey, soldier boy." The whisper came from the cage beside his. Jake turned to see a young girl, maybe 16, with matted brown hair and fierce green eyes that somehow still held defiance. Her cage was smaller, labeled with symbols Jake had learned meant premium grade. "You're military, right?" she continued, keeping her voice low. "I can tell by how you stand." Jake said nothing. Getting attached to other prisoners was a mistake he'd made before. It only made watching them die harder. "My name's Sarah Chin. I was in the Academy Prep program when they came." She paused, studying his face. "You were there, weren't you? During the fall." Jake's jaw tightened. "It doesn't matter now." "It does matter." Her voice carried surprising strength. "Because I know what you're thinking. I see it in your eyes, that look that says you've given up. But we're not dead yet." The Vorthack auctioneer's voice boomed again. "Next lot. Young female, aged perfectly for the dinner table. Bidding starts at 50,000 credits." Sarah's cage began moving toward the platform. She reached through the bars, her fingers barely touching Jake's. "Sold for meat, human. Hold me. Save me. Just get me out of here," she whispered. But her eyes burned with something Jake had forgotten existed. Hope. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here was a kid, facing death, begging not just for rescue but for him to remember who he used to be. The crowd of alien buyers pressed closer, their various appendages waving currency chips in the air. A massive Grethic with stone-like skin held up a golden payment card, its multiple eyes gleaming with hunger. Jake felt something crack inside his chest, a wall he'd built around his heart to survive. This girl, this brave, foolish girl, was about to die because he'd chosen to be a coward, because he'd let the weight of humanity's defeat crush his spirit. The platform's spotlight hit Sarah, and she stood straighter despite her chains. Even facing death, she carried herself like a soldier, like the human he used to be. 55,000, screeched a reptilian scree from the front row. 60, countered the Grethic. Jake's mind raced. The holding area was guarded by 2 Vorthack soldiers. He'd memorized their patrol patterns weeks ago, old habits from his military days. The weapon lockers were 20 meters away, behind a basic electronic lock he could probably bypass. But even if he could free himself, what then? Take on an entire auction house full of hostile aliens? 70,000. Going once. The old Jake would have called it suicide. The old Jake had been willing to die for humanity. This Jake, this broken shell, had spent 3 years learning to survive. But maybe survival wasn't living at all. Sarah caught his eye one more time, and he saw something that made his breath catch. She wasn't looking at him with the desperation of someone about to die. She was looking at him with the expectation of someone who still believed in heroes. Going twice. Jake closed his eyes and made his choice. The lock clicked open under Jake's practiced fingers just as the auctioneer's hammer came down. 75,000 credits. Sarah had been sold to a scree flesh merchant whose reputation for keeping his inventory alive and suffering was legendary throughout the sector. Jake slipped from his cage, muscle memory from countless covert operations guiding his movements. The 2 Vorthack guards were focused on the auction, their attention drawn by increasingly aggressive bidding over a group of elderly humans. Their translator implants buzzed with discussions of aged meat and exotic preparation methods. 23 steps to the weapon locker. Jake counted each one, his bare feet silent on the cold metal floor. The facility's recycled air carried the scent of alien pheromones. Excitement, hunger, anticipation. It made his skin crawl. The weapon locker's electronic lock was older than the cage systems, probably salvaged from a human ship. Jake almost smiled at the irony as his fingers danced across the keypad, inputting the universal military override code that had been standard on Earth Defense Force vessels. Some things never changed. The locker opened with a soft hiss. Inside, 2 Vortak plasma rifles, a human-made pulse pistol that looked like it had seen better decades, and, Jake's heart skipped, a combat knife with Earth Defense Force markings. He grabbed the knife first, its familiar weight centering him in a way nothing had for 3 years. Lot 17. Breeding pair. Excellent for establishing private stock. The auction continued. Sarah's cage was being wheeled toward the exit, heading for the loading bay where her new owner waited. Jake had maybe 5 minutes before she disappeared forever into the meat markets of Scree Prime. He checked the pulse pistol's charge 30%. Not much, but it would have to do. The plasma rifles were too big for stealth, and he needed stealth for what came next. Jake moved through the shadows behind the holding cages, past dozens of humans who watched him with varying degrees of hope and terror. Some reached through their bars, grasping at him like drowning swimmers. He couldn't save them all, couldn't even guarantee he'd save one. But Sarah's words echoed in his mind. "We're not dead yet." The loading bay door was guarded by a single Grethik, its rocky hide scarred from what looked like a lifetime of violence. It stood 3 meters tall, with arms thick as tree trunks and a hide that could probably deflect small arms fire. Jake had fought Grethik before, back when he had a ship and a crew in hope. They were tough but predictable, all brute force and no imagination. Sarah's transport cage sat on a hover platform, ready for loading. Through the transparent aluminum, Jake could see her pressed against the far side, watching the Scree merchant inspect his other recent purchases. The reptilian alien's forked tongue flicked out, tasting the air around the cages with obvious satisfaction. Jake crept closer, using the park transports as cover. The Grethik guard's attention was fixed on a datapad, probably reviewing shipping manifests. Its massive fingers moved with surprising delicacy across the screen. 15 meters. 10. 5. The guard's head snapped up, nostrils flaring. Grethik had excellent senses of smell, and Jake had been living in a cage for months. He was hardly at his stealthiest. "Human." The creature's voice rumbled like grinding stone. "How did you?" Jake didn't let it finish. The pulse pistol barked twice, concentrated energy beams striking the guard center mass. The shots barely scorched its hide, but the impact staggered it long enough for Jake to close the distance. The combat knife found the gap between the creature's neck plates, sliding home with practiced precision. The Grethik's roar of rage became a gurgle, then silence. "Jake!" Sarah's voice was barely audible through the cage walls. "Working on it." Jake's fingers flew over the transport's control panel. Standard galactic trade language, thankfully, one of the few useful things he'd learned in captivity. The cage door hissed open. Sarah stumbled out, nearly falling as her legs remembered how to support her weight. Jake caught her arm, steadying her. "The others," she gasped, pointing to the remaining cages on the platform. "No time." Jake was already moving toward the bay's exit. More guards will. Alarms began wailing. Emergency lights bathed the loading bay in angry red. The auction house's security systems had finally noticed the dead guard. "This way." Jake pulled Sarah toward a maintenance shaft he'd spotted during his weeks of observation. "Can you climb? Try and stop me." As they squeezed into the narrow shaft, Jake heard the sound of running feet and shouted orders in a dozen alien languages. The hunt had begun. The maintenance shaft led to the station's lower levels, a maze of service corridors and abandoned sections that housed the infrastructure keeping New Vega Station operational. Jake had studied these passages during countless sleepless nights in his cage, memorizing every junction and dead end through careful observation of maintenance crews. Sarah moved behind him with surprising grace, her academy training showing despite months of captivity. She didn't complain about the cramped conditions or the sharp edges of exposed conduits that scraped their skin. Every few meters, Jake paused to listen for pursuit, but the sounds of the hunt seemed focused on the upper levels. "Where are we going?" Sarah whispered as they emerged into a wider corridor lined with humming processors. "Dock 7. There's a cargo hauler that makes regular runs to the outer systems. Captain owes me a favor." Jake didn't mention that the favor was 3 years old, or that Captain Vex might just as easily turn them over to station security for the bounty. They moved through the station's bowels, past massive air recyclers and water processing units that kept 60,000 beings alive in the vacuum of space. The irony wasn't lost on Jake. They were fugitives hiding in the very systems that sustained their captors. "You know this place well," Sarah observed. 3 years of planning." Jake checked his chronometer. 23 minutes until shift change. "That's our window." "You've been planning this for 3 years?" There was something in her voice. Disappointment, maybe anger. "And you waited until now?" Jake stopped, turning to face her in the dim corridor lighting. "Planning to escape, yes. Planning to rescue someone else? That's new." "Why me?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Jake could have given her a dozen practical answers. She was young, strong, useful. But the truth was simpler and more complicated. "Because you reminded me who I used to be." Before Sarah could respond, footsteps echoed from behind them, multiple sets moving fast. Jake grabbed her hand and pulled her into a side passage just as a squad of Vortex security troops passed their hiding spot. Tracking devices show the human scent moving toward the lower docks. One guard chittered to another. "Seal sections 14 through 20. Jake's blood went cold. Tracking devices meant they'd analyzed the crime scene, probably found skin cells or hair he'd left behind. They had maybe 10 minutes before the net closed completely. "Change of plans," he whispered. "We're not making it to Dock 7. "Then where?" Jake closed his eyes, calling up the station schematics he'd memorized. There was one place security rarely bothered with, one section of the station considered too dangerous for regular patrols. The Forgotten Quarter. Sarah's face went pale. Even as a prisoner, she'd heard the stories. The Forgotten Quarter was where the station's original human crew had made their last stand during the conquest. 30,000 people had barricaded themselves in that section, fighting room by room until the aliens finally used chemical weapons to flush them out. The area had been sealed ever since, officially for safety reasons, unofficially because strange things happened there. Equipment malfunctioned. Guards reported hearing voices in empty corridors. Some said the dead still walked those halls. "That's suicide," Sarah breathed. "Maybe, but it's our only chance." They moved deeper into the station's infrastructure, following maintenance paths that hadn't seen foot traffic in months. The air grew colder as they descended, and Jake noticed their breath beginning to mist. The environmental systems down here were minimal, just enough to prevent the infrastructure from freezing. The entrance to the Forgotten Quarter was marked with warning signs in 17 languages. The massive blast door was sealed with both electronic locks and old-fashioned welds. But Jake had spotted something during his observations that others had missed: a ventilation grate large enough for a human to squeeze through. As he worked to remove the grate's fasteners with the tip of his combat knife, Sarah kept watch. Her hand rested on the pulse pistol he'd given her, though they both knew their limited ammunition wouldn't last long in a real firefight. "Jake," she said softly, "in the cage, when I asked you to save me, I didn't mean just me. I know. There are still millions of them out there. Humans in cages, on breeding farms, in processing centers." The last fastener came free. Jake pulled the grate aside, revealing a dark passage that seemed to swallow their flashlight beam. "I know," he repeated, "but we can't save them if we're dead. Can we save them if we're alive?" Jake met her eyes. 3 years ago, he would have said yes without hesitation. Captain Morrison would have already been planning the counterattack, organizing the resistance, preparing to take back what humanity had lost. But Captain Morrison had died with his ship over Earth. The man who remained wasn't sure he could save anyone. "I don't know," he admitted. Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "Then let's find out." The forgotten quarter smelled of death and ozone. As Jake and Sarah crawled through the ventilation shaft, the metallic scent grew stronger, mixed with something else. A sweetness that made Jake's stomach turn. He'd smelled it before during the worst battles of the war. It was the smell of human bodies left too long in recycled air. They emerged into what had once been a residential corridor. Emergency lighting cast everything in sickly green shadows, revealing walls scarred by plasma fire and explosive decompression. Personal belongings lay scattered across the floor. Children's toys, family photos, everyday items that had once meant everything to someone. "My God," Sarah whispered. Jake had seen battlefields before, but this was different. This was where families had made their final stand, where parents had held their children as the chemical weapons seeped through their barricades, where 30,000 people had chosen to die as humans rather than live as livestock. "Stay close," Jake said, stepping carefully over a child's stuffed animal. "The atmospheric processors down here are unreliable. Air could turn toxic without warning." They moved deeper into the residential section, following emergency exit signs toward what Jake hoped would be another way out. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of failing life support systems and the occasional creak of stressed metal. "There," Sarah pointed to a sign reading Command Center Section C. Jake nodded. If anyone had survived down here, they would have fallen back to the command centers. Even if they hadn't, military installations might have communication equipment they could use to contact the outside. The command center's blast doors hung open, twisted and partially melted. Inside, banks of dark monitors surrounded a central holographic display table. Jake approached one of the workstations and activated it with his Earth Defense Force access codes. To his surprise, the system came online. "Emergency protocols active," the computer announced in a familiar female voice. "Biometric scan required for full access." Jake placed his palm on the scanner. A blue light played across his hand, and he held his breath. His codes were 3 years old, and he'd been presumed dead along with the rest of his crew. Identity confirmed. "Welcome, Captain Morrison. Command authority transferred." Sarah stared at him. "Captain." "Former captain," Jake said, but he was already accessing the system's databases. What he found made his blood run cold. The forgotten quarter wasn't abandoned. It was inhabited. "Jake," Sarah grabbed his arm. "Look at this." She'd activated another workstation, this one displaying security feeds from throughout the sealed section. The cameras showed empty corridors, abandoned quarters, broken equipment. But every few seconds, Jake caught glimpses of movement. Shadows that didn't match any visible objects, brief flickers that might have been people. "The reports were true," Sarah breathed. "There are still people down here." Jake pulled up the station's original crew manifest. 30,000 names, all listed as casualties. But the computer's current scan showed life signs. Faint, scattered, but definitely human. Impossible. No one could survive 3 years down here without support. A new voice answered from behind them. "You'd be surprised what humans can do when they have no choice." Jake spun, pulse pistol raised, to find an older woman standing in the doorway. She was thin to the point of emaciation, her gray hair hanging in tangles, but her eyes burned with fierce intelligence. She wore the remnants of a station security uniform. "Security Chief Martinez," she said, noting Jake's stare at her badge. "Though I suppose I'm more of a ghost these days." "How many?" Jake asked. "Survivors? Maybe 200. The strong ones, the smart ones, the ones who learned to stay quiet and move fast." Martinez stepped closer, studying Jake's face. "You're the one who killed the Grethic guard. Security cameras caught your face before you disappeared." Jake kept his weapon ready. "Are you turning us in?" Martinez laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "To who? The aliens who murdered my family? The ones who turn humans into dinner?" She shook her head. "No, Captain Morrison. We've been waiting for someone like you. You know who I am? Every human in the galaxy knows who you are. The last Earth Defense Force captain. The one who made them bleed for every inch of space." Martinez gestured to the command center. We've been monitoring their communications, learning their weaknesses, planning. Sarah stepped forward. Planning what? Revenge. The word hung in the air like a promise. Martinez activated the central holodisplay, and a three-dimensional map of the station appeared. Red dots marked security checkpoints, weapon emplacements, and critical systems. Blue dots showed hidden passages and blind spots. We know every secret of this station, Martinez continued. Every vulnerability, every way to make the aliens hurt. She looked directly at Jake. But we needed someone who could lead, someone who could turn planning into action. Jake stared at the tactical display. It was exactly what he would have prepared for an assault on an enemy installation. These weren't just survivors, they were soldiers. How many are willing to fight? All of us. What else do we have to lose? Jake thought about the auction house above them, the cages full of humans waiting to die. He thought about breeding farms and processing centers throughout the galaxy. He thought about Earth burning in space while its children were sold for meat. Captain Morrison had died over Earth. But maybe, just maybe, he could be reborn in the depths of an alien station. Then let's give them a war they'll never forget. The assault began at shift change, when New Vega Station was at its most vulnerable. Jake moved through the maintenance shafts with 15 volunteers, the strongest and most experienced of Martinez's survivors. They'd armed themselves with improvised weapons and stolen equipment, but more importantly, they carried 3 years of rage. Sarah led a second team toward the station's communication array. Their mission was to broadcast a message across the galaxy. Proof that humans still fought, still resisted, still refused to accept their fate as livestock. If they succeeded, it might inspire other survivors. If they failed, at least their deaths would mean something. Jake's team reached the main power distribution center without detection. The Vortak engineer on duty never saw the combat knife that ended his life. Within minutes, Jake had accessed the power grid controls. Phase 1 complete, he whispered into his communicator. Standing by. Martinez's voice crackled back. Teams 3 and 4 in position. Charges set on the docking pylons. Jake checked his chronometer. 18 minutes until the next security patrol. Once they started, there would be no stopping. No going back. They would either liberate the station or die trying. All teams, this is Morrison. Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every human in every cage across the galaxy. We're fighting to prove that humanity doesn't kneel. He paused, thinking of Sarah's words. Execute. Jake's fingers flew across the power control interface. Lights died throughout the station, plunging critical sections into darkness. Emergency systems kicked in, but not fast enough to prevent chaos in the alien quarters. Explosions echoed through the station structure as Martinez's charges destroyed 3 docking pylons, trapping the alien ships currently in port. Any reinforcements would have to come from other systems, buying them precious time. Jake's team moved toward the auction house, following routes they'd memorized during weeks of planning. They met scattered resistance, confused guards, panicked civilians, but the element of surprise carried them forward. The auction house was in chaos when they arrived. Emergency lighting cast everything in red shadows as aliens of a dozen species ran for the exits. The human cages had been abandoned, their guards fled or dead. Free them all, Jake ordered. Anyone who can fight, arm them. Anyone who can't, get them to the shelters. As his team worked to open the cages, Jake's communicator buzzed with Sarah's voice. Communication array secure. Broadcasting now. Across the galaxy, on worlds where humans labored in chains, in breeding facilities where children grew up knowing only captivity, in processing centers where people faced their final moments. Sarah's voice carried a message of hope. This is Sarah Chun speaking for the human resistance. We are not extinct. We are not defeated. We do not accept our fate as livestock for alien tables. The fire of humanity burns on, and it will burn until every chain is broken and every cage is opened. To our people in bondage, you are not forgotten. To our enemies, we are coming. Jake smiled as he helped an elderly man from his cage. The message would be heard. More importantly, it would be believed. But their victory was short-lived. The The station's main blast doors began sealing, trapping them inside. Commander Thex, the Vortak officer who ran New Vega Station, had decided to contain the rebellion rather than suppress it. Morrison. Thex's voice echoed through the station's communication systems. I know you can hear me. Surrender now, and I'll make your deaths quick. Continue this futile resistance, and I'll ensure every human on this station dies slowly. Jake grabbed a communicator from a fallen guard. This is Captain Morrison. I have a counteroffer. Release every human on this station, and I'll consider letting you live. Thex's laughter was like breaking glass. Amusing. You're trapped, outnumbered, and outgunned. My reinforcements will arrive within the hour. Your reinforcements won't matter if there's no station left to reinforce. The silence that followed told Jake his bluff had been called. But it wasn't entirely a bluff. Martinez had mentioned something during their planning, a way to ensure their sacrifice mattered even if they couldn't escape. Sarah. Jake called into his communicator. How's your knowledge of station infrastructure? Better than I'd like. Why? Meet me at the fusion reactor. We need to have a conversation about critical system failures. Jake looked around the auction house, now filled with freed humans helping each other, tending wounds, sharing water and hope. Some were too broken to fight, but they were free. Others burned with the same rage that had sustained Martinez's people for 3 years. A young man approached, couldn't be more than 20, but his eyes held the hardness of someone who'd seen too much. Captain, what are your orders? Orders. Jake had given his last order 3 years ago, watching his ship die around him. But these people needed more than a broken survivor. They needed a leader. Secure the freed prisoners. Establish defensive positions around the critical systems. Prepare for counterattack. Jake's voice carried the authority he'd thought lost forever. And someone find me a way to contact the ships in the outer systems. It's time to let the galaxy know that humanity is back in the war. The fusion reactor's control room hummed with barely contained energy. Jake studied the containment field readings while Sarah worked at a secondary console, her fingers dancing across holographic displays with the confidence of someone who understood the technology intimately. The reactor's running at 92% capacity, she reported. If we destabilize the containment field, we'll have maybe 4 minutes before cascade failure. Enough time to evacuate the human quarters? If we're lucky. Jake nodded. It wasn't much of a plan. Sacrifice themselves and the station to deny the aliens their victory. But it was better than watching their people get dragged back to the cages. Captain. Martinez's voice crackled through the communicator. We're receiving responses to our broadcast. Ships throughout the outer rim are reporting human crews taking control. There are uprisings on 17 worlds. Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years. Hope. Not the desperate hope of the condemned, but the real thing. The spark that could ignite a galaxy. Sir, Sarah said quietly, I'm reading massive power signatures on the long-range sensors. Multiple ships moving fast. Jake's heart sank. Thex's reinforcements, arriving ahead of schedule. He moved to the tactical display, expecting to see Vortak battlecruisers or Grethik assault ships. Instead, he saw something impossible. Those are human ships, Sarah breathed. The lead vessel was a heavy cruiser, its hull scarred by countless battles but its weapons powered and ready. Following it came a motley fleet of converted cargo haulers, mining ships, and pleasure craft, all flying the blue and white banner of the Earth Defense Force. Jake's communicator buzzed with an incoming transmission. The voice that emerged was gravel-rough but unmistakably human. New Vega Station, this is Admiral Chun aboard the EDF Defiance. We heard someone down there needed rescuing. Admiral Chun? Sarah gasped. That's my father. Jake grabbed the communicator. Admiral, this is Captain Morrison. What's your status? Alive, angry, and tired of running. We've been gathering survivors for 3 years, building a fleet, waiting for the right moment to strike back. Your girlfriend's broadcast was exactly the signal we needed. Jake looked at Sarah, who was crying and laughing at the same time. How many ships? 87 vessels, 15,000 crew. Not much by pre-war standards, But it's a start. Chen's voice hardened. Morrison, we're detecting weapons charging on the station. Are you in immediate danger? Negative, Admiral. We control the critical systems. But there are still thousands of aliens on board, including civilians. Your call, Captain. We can glass the station from orbit or board and secure it. Jake closed his eyes, feeling the weight of command settle on his shoulders like an old, familiar coat. 3 years ago, he would have chosen the hard option. Board the station, minimize casualties, try to save everyone. 3 years of captivity had taught him that sometimes mercy was a luxury humanity couldn't afford. But Sarah's hand on his arm reminded him who he used to be. We board. Secure the alien civilians, but give their military forces one chance to surrender. Copy that. Marine shuttles launching now. The next hour was controlled chaos. Human Marines swept through the station, overwhelming the remaining guards with superior tactics and equipment. Commander Thex barricaded himself in the command center with his remaining troops, refusing demands for surrender. Jake led the assault personally, his combat knife finding its mark with deadly precision. When the blast doors finally fell, Thex stood alone among his dead soldiers, his 4 arms raised in a gesture of defiance. You think this changes anything? The alien commander hissed. We own your worlds. Your people breed in our farms. One station means nothing. Jake approached slowly, his knife reflecting the emergency lighting. You're right. One station means nothing. But this isn't about one station. Then what? It's about remembering who we are. Jake's blade found the gap in Thex's natural armor. Humans don't kneel. 3 days later, Jake stood on the observation deck of the EDF Defiance, watching New Vega Station recede into the distance. The facility now served as a refugee center and recruitment station, processing the steady stream of escaped humans who arrived daily. Sarah joined him at the viewport, her new lieutenant's insignia gleaming on her collar. Admiral Chun had been impressed by her technical skills and tactical thinking during the station assault. Any regrets? She asked. Jake considered the question. 3 years ago, he'd been a defeated captain watching his species face extinction. Now he commanded a growing fleet of liberation ships, striking at alien installations across the galaxy. The war was far from over, might take decades to truly win, but humanity was fighting back. No regrets, he said finally, but plenty of work left to do. Sarah smiled. Then let's get to it, Captain. As the Defiance jumped to hyperspace, carrying them toward their next target, Jake felt something he'd thought lost forever. Not just hope, but certainty. Humanity would survive. Humanity would fight. And humanity would never kneel again. In the depths of space, other ships carried Sarah's message to distant worlds. In hidden bases and secret facilities, humans heard the call and answered. The resistance was growing, ship by ship, world by world, one freed soul at a time. The aliens had made one critical mistake. They had assumed that breaking humanity's military meant breaking the human spirit. They had learned, too late, that some things cannot be caged, cannot be sold, cannot be consumed. Freedom burns eternal in the human heart, and its fire would light the galaxy until every chain was broken and every cage stood empty. The last human had become the first of many, and the war for liberation had truly begun. The war room aboard the EDF Liberator buzzed with controlled energy. Holographic displays showed star charts marking liberated systems in blue, contested zones in yellow, and enemy strongholds still burning red across the galaxy. Jake Morrison stood at the center of it all, no longer the broken prisoner who had cowered in a cage, but the admiral who had become the face of human resistance. Report, Jake commanded as his senior staff gathered around the tactical table. Captain Sarah Chun, now his chief intelligence officer, activated the central display. Operation Break Chain is proceeding ahead of schedule. We've successfully liberated 47 breeding facilities across 12 systems in the past month alone. Total rescued, approximately 200,000 humans. Admiral Chun, Sarah's father and Jake's second-in-command, leaned forward. The enemy is adapting, though. They've started moving their human assets to more secure facilities, deeper in their territory. The easy targets are gone. Jake nodded grimly. The initial wave of liberation raids had caught the alien coalition off guard, but their enemies were learning. The Vortak had consolidated their human livestock into massive fortress facilities, heavily defended and nearly impossible to assault directly. The Grethik had begun executing prisoners at the first sign of human ships in their systems, choosing to deny the resistance their people rather than risk losing them to rescue operations. "What about the breeding program intelligence?" Jake asked. Sarah's expression darkened. "Worse than we thought. They've been selectively breeding humans for docility and nutritional value for over 50 years, even before the conquest. Some of the genetic modifications." She paused, struggling with the words. "Some of our people can barely function independently anymore. Generations of conditioning have left them unable to comprehend freedom." The room fell silent. It was one thing to rescue humans who still remembered what it meant to be free. It was another to find people so broken by alien manipulation that they feared their own liberation. "We'll deal with that challenge when we come to it," Jake said firmly. "Right now, we focus on what we can control." Status of the fleet. Commander Torres, the fleet's tactical coordinator, stepped forward. 300 ships now flying the EDF banner, though most are converted civilian vessels. "We've established 7 base stations in asteroid fields and abandoned systems. Crew strength is approaching 50,000, with more volunteers arriving daily. Supplies? That's the good news. Every liberated facility yields weapons, ships, and intelligence. The aliens stockpiled human-compatible equipment for their security forces and maintenance crews. We're actually better equipped now than when we started." Jake smiled at that irony. The aliens' practice of using human slaves to maintain their technology had provided the resistance with everything they needed to fight back. Former engineers now built weapons. Former technicians now piloted warships. Former prisoners now commanded liberation fleets. "Sir," Sarah interrupted, her voice tight with excitement. "Priority transmission coming in from Strike Force Delta. Captain Martinez has found something." The holographic display shifted to show the grizzled face of Security Chief Martinez, now commanding her own liberation vessel. Behind her, Jake could see the interior of what looked like an alien research facility. "Admiral Morrison," Martinez said, "you need to see this. We've found the central database for the entire human breeding program. Genetic records, facility locations, population numbers, everything." Jake felt his pulse quicken. How much data? Comprehensive records for every human facility in known space. Plus something else, communication logs between the alien races. They're not as united as they pretend to be. Sarah leaned closer to the display. "What kind of communications?" Martinez's smile was predatory. "The Vortak and Grethik are fighting over human breeding rights. Seems the Scree think they're both being too wasteful with the livestock. There's a 3-way power struggle brewing, and they're all looking to expand their territory at the other's expense." Jake exchanged glances with Admiral Chun. A divided enemy was a vulnerable enemy. "Get me everything," Jake ordered. "Every file, every communication, every scrap of intelligence." "And Martinez, excellent work." "Just doing my job, sir." Martinez out. As the transmission ended, Jake turned to his staff. "This changes our entire strategy. If the alien coalition is fracturing, we can exploit those divisions." "A 3-front war," Admiral Chun mused. "While they're fighting each other, they can't coordinate against us." "More than that," Sarah added, her mind already racing ahead. "We can play them against each other. Feed intelligence to the Scree about Vortak facility locations. Let the Grethik know where the Scree are keeping their premium breeding stock. Let them tear each other apart while we free our people." Jake felt a familiar fire building in his chest, the same strategic excitement he'd felt during the best moments of the war for Earth. "Sarah, I want a complete analysis of those communication logs. Look for pressure points, rivalries, anything we can exploit. Admiral Chin, start reaching out to our cell leaders in alien territory. We're going to need coordination for what comes next." "What exactly comes next?" Commander Torres asked. Jake turned to the star chart, studying the red zones that marked enemy strongholds. For 6 months, they'd been reactive, rescuing humans where they could, striking targets of opportunity, building their strength. But the intelligence Martinez had found changed everything. Now they could be proactive. "We're going to start a civil war," Jake said simply. "And while our enemies are busy killing each other, we're going to take back our people." The next several hours passed in a blur of planning and preparation. Intelligence teams pored over the captured data, identifying key facilities and strategic vulnerabilities. Communication specialists reached out to resistance cells throughout the galaxy, coordinating a massive simultaneous operation. Engineers worked frantically to outfit more ships for combat, knowing they would need every vessel for what was coming. Sarah found Jake alone in his quarters near midnight, staring out at the stars through the viewport. She could see the weight of command on his shoulders, 50,000 lives depending on his decisions, millions more counting on his success. "You know," she said, settling into the chair beside him, "6 months ago you told me you didn't know if we could save them. I remember. Do you know now?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, considering the question that had haunted him since that first day in the cage. "I know we're going to try. I know we're not going to stop until every cage is empty or we're all dead. Beyond that," he shrugged, "the galaxy's a big place. There are a lot of cages. But we're not the same people who were captured 3 years ago. We're not even the same people who escaped from New Vega Station. We've become something new." Jake turned to look at her. "What's that?" "Dangerous." Sarah's smile held no humor, only cold determination. "We're not victims anymore. We're not survivors. We're predators, and our prey thinks it's safe because it's never been hunted before." Jake nodded slowly. She was right. The aliens had made humans into livestock, but in doing so, they had also created something they never expected. A species with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. "The operation begins in 72 hours, he said. "Simultaneous strikes on 57 facilities across 23 systems. We'll hit their breeding programs, their research stations, their communication hubs. Everything at once, before they can coordinate a response. And after that? After that, we find out what humans can really do when they stop playing by their captors' rules." Sarah stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Jake? The girl in the cage who asked you to save her. She's gone now. She died the moment she stepped onto that transport platform 6 months ago. The woman standing here is someone new, someone forged by war and tempered by victory. Don't mourn the girl. She served her purpose." Alone again, Jake turned back to the viewport. Somewhere out there, millions of humans still lived in cages, still faced daily the prospect of ending up on an alien's dinner table. Children grew up not knowing the sky, not understanding freedom, not even comprehending that they were prisoners. But that was about to change. In 72 hours, the galaxy would learn what humanity looked like when it stopped being prey and started being predator. The aliens had spent decades breeding humans for docility, but they had forgotten one crucial fact about evolution. Pressure creates adaptation, and extreme pressure creates extreme adaptation. They had created their own worst nightmare. A species with the intelligence to plan, the technology to fight, and the motivation that came from having absolutely nothing left to lose. Jake smiled at his reflection in the viewport. Captain Morrison had died over Earth 3 years ago. Admiral Morrison had been born in a cage 6 months ago. But the man looking back at him now was something entirely new, the architect of alien extinction. The last human had indeed become the first of many. But perhaps more importantly, the prey had become the hunter. And the hunt was about to begin.